Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, the fallout from the Attorney General's sting operation of Pennsylvania lawmakers continues to make big news. A journalist roundtable is about to happen.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Welcome back to the program. Well, it was certainly huge news when the current Attorney General decided not to move forward with the prosecution of 4 lawmakers and a Philadelphia traffic judge for accepting gifts, cash gifts. We're going to get into the fallout from that. Joining me to do that is a panel of journalists, some of the top journalists in the state. Sitting right here next to me is Karen Langley with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Across from me is John Micek. He's the editorial page editor of PennLive, the Harrisburg Patriot News, and Angela Couloumbis with the Philadelphia Inquirer was one of the 2 reporters that broke this big story. Angela, let's start with you. For our viewers who, may not be, focusing on this story or have some of the details, give us a quick summary of the sting operation. What was that about?
Well, here's what we know, and here are some facts that are not under dispute, and there are many in this story.
I understand.
But there was a sting investigation that was started in late 2010 under Tom Corbett, who was then the Attorney General. And it involved an undercover operative who wore a body wire and was sent out into the political community and asked to essentially troll for corruption. What he did was offer cash, he offered money orders, and he offered gifts to various elected officials. We know of at least 5 who were caught on tape accepting those. And after Kathleen Kane became Attorney General in 2013, she shut down the investigation. She has said she felt it was poorly managed and that it was possibly tinged with racial profiling because the 4 lawmakers and the traffic judge in Philadelphia are all African American.
African American, right.
And she shut it down, and there has been, since that time, many questions as to whether that was a correct decision to make. She certainly feels that that is the case. The veteran prosecutors who ran the sting investigation felt it was a sound, by-the-book inquiry that had the possibility of bringing in other elected officials had it been allowed to continue.
Yeah. John, I'll put you on the spot. I always do anyway. Look, you're an editorial page guy, right? In this case, Kathleen Kane asked for a meeting with the editorial board of Angela's paper and then took a lawyer. That's a kind of I've never heard of that. You've been a reporter for a long time. Without getting into the details of, is that an unusual act on the part of an attorney general, to put it bluntly?
Considering that she has an entire office block of lawyers at her disposal, that she chose to hire, Dick Sprague, the famous Philadelphia libel lawyer, to come in to this meeting with her. And then, as I recall, and Angela can correct me on this, Mr. Sprague didn't allow Ms. Kane to speak and did all the speaking for her. That happened in our editorial board. It'd be a heck of a short meeting.
Yeah. Well, I think it was a relatively short meeting. But that's just sort of something, without getting into whether the Attorney General was right or wrong. I just never have seen done.
It really strikes. If you're talking, this is a woman who ran on, reforming Harrisburg,
right?
Taking on a culture of corruption, increasing government transparency. If you lawyer up walking into an editorial board meeting, that sends all the wrong messages about where you stand on transparency, at least from where I'm sitting.
Now, one of the things that struck me as also unusual, and I've talked to lawmakers, by the way, and in fact, I had the Auditor General of the state on last week, and at a break we were talking about this, and he was a former lawmaker. He didn't even know, and I've talked to others, that you could give cash, literally hand over cash. What's that about?
So, I mean, that's certainly been a topic of discussion in the Capitol as this story has reverberated for the past couple weeks. And so, I mean, at first, of course, you have interest that these lawmakers, sitting lawmakers, allegedly violated the ban on reporting gifts of a certain size. But beyond that, you are hearing from a lot of people, including some lobbyists, that they did not know that this was acceptable, or that this shouldn't be acceptable. And so we've had a lot of calls in the Capitol in the last few weeks for some kind of ban on this activity.
Yeah, we can talk about that, but I mean, typically you would think that you could, and we all knew about this, you could take a lawmaker to dinner, you could take them to play golf, and as long as they reported it, I think the threshold is $250 per individual, $650 a year. You all can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but money? I can give somebody $2 or $3 grand, I'll put it in my pocket? I mean, that sent, I think, in and of itself, shockwaves through the Capitol, right?
And as of this week, the House leadership says that House members are no longer allowed to accept cash gifts, which is something that their leadership determined.
Okay. Now, that's a stunning departure. I mean, so as Karen just pointed out, there is now a rule in the House, is this correct? A rule in the House that you must report or you cannot give cash gifts. Go ahead.
That's right. I just want to add one thing, because you still are not allowed to, as a lawmaker, to accept cash in return for an official favor. So
I got it.
That part is clear.
Not to vote for a law, or to, let's say somebody wants a state contract, you can't say, I'll take the money, and a quid pro quo, right?
Right. But theoretically, somebody could walk in and give a lawmaker $1,000 in cash for Christmas. Here, Merry Christmas.
Oh, that's crazy. I mean, never mind. Maybe I shouldn't say this as the host, but I don't.
I can. I mean, and one of the beauties of being who I am. I mean, this is one of the things that makes me bananas about this town, and I think justifiably undermines public confidence in their elected leaders.
Yeah.
Okay, we can say, I've just handed you $500. I'm not going to vote for issue X.
Right.
And it takes a level of cognitive dissonance not to think, all right, that there's not going to be some linkage between cash and what it buys is access.
Yeah. All right. We're journalist roundtable here on this very important topic. There's some other aspect of this subject we'll take up in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back to the Journalist Roundtable. Angela Couloumbis, John Micek, Karen Langley, journalists all. I just was a little redundant there. All right, we were talking about this issue that has been huge news. Lawmakers caught on tape in a sting operation. How that case moves forward, I'm going to talk to Angela in a minute. But before I get to that, John and Karen, this ethics thing is still mind-boggling. Where does this go? I mean, the House does something, but John, what about enforcement?
Well,
isn't it all about whether the leaders and the ethics committees of the chambers are going to enforce their own rules?
Yeah, I mean, we saw this the other week. A couple of former Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board officials who failed to report gifts were fined by the State Ethics Commission. I mean, the one thing we're talking about a ban on cash gifts, right? So debit cards, I mean, there are bills in the Senate pending to that effect. But that's putting aside the fact that you can still kite off to the Virgin Islands with a lawmaker on vacation, or take them out to dinner, or fly them to Dallas for a Super Bowl party. The cash gifts thing is an incremental start. But if you're talking about restoring public confidence in government, I think that there has to be a full and complete ban on any
ban.
gift
Congress
for
has a
elected and
complete
appointed
ban.
officials.
Yeah.
And I'll just plug for a moment here, PennLive has a petition drive to that effect, and I would urge viewers to stop by the website and sign it. I mean,
You can plug that.
I'm going to. But I mean, if you're talking about restoring public faith in government, then it's not enough to ban cash gifts, which just beggars the imagination.
And I didn't even, and I'll bet you that's not where the locus of the problem lay anyway.
Well,
go ahead. What's going? The Senate going to? What are they going to do?
So the Senate has some proposals to ban cash gifts and equivalents that's expected to come up, I think, next week. I think they're still working out the details on that. There's a number of calls out there for this kind of action. Of course, this is a popular issue at the moment for politicians to jump on. We had one of the Democratic candidates for governor, Katie McGinty, at the Capitol the other day calling for a ban on everything, including those trips to the Virgin Islands that John mentioned. And I think we're going to keep hearing that in the immediate future.
All right, Angela, there's another piece to this, and this has to do with, there's the big debate over whether or not Kathleen Kane should have moved forward with a prosecution. Right. It goes to the heart of the nature of the way the case was prosecuted. So far, so good?
Yes.
And whether or not the informant would have been a good witness, whether he was too tainted. So there's an effort being, but we don't know much because the record, finish my thought.
Well, the informant was a man by the name of Tyron Ali, and he was a Philadelphia lobbyist. And he had been, prior to his cooperation with the Attorney General's office in the Sting investigation, he had been charged in a massive fraud case. And he had been given essentially a deal that all of those charges would be dropped in exchange for his cooperation. What we saw is that in that case, there are a number of sealed records, including how essentially the charges were dropped against him. Those records are not available to the public. They are under seal, and there's a major effort underway to get them unsealed. More than a half dozen, I think it's almost nearly a dozen news organizations across the state have petitioned the court to get those records unsealed so that we can see what exactly went down. How did this case end? Who said what and why? Yeah. We're hoping that they cast some sort of...
And the Attorney General is now supporting that, correct?
Yes, she released a statement, I think, yesterday supporting the Tribune review, which is signed on with the Patriot News has signed on. I think every newspaper, news organization at this table is now party to this effort as well.
To get these records unsealed. To get these records, and then we'll get a better sense about. All right, moving forward, and we'll put an end to this, and then we'll go on to some other stories. Is this going to lead to larger and more profound change in the way, I mean, reformers are now back screaming about the lack of reform, whether it has to do with lobbyists, ethics, campaign finance. Have any of you picked up anything about whether anything else is percolating other than this sort of narrow, and anything going on, or is it just mostly focusing on the gifts?
The concrete proposals I have heard are about the gifts. Maybe others at the table have heard other proposals.
But just mostly about the gifts?
To my knowledge, yes.
Anything else that any of you have heard?
No, I mean, you like to think that this is going to be lasting and permanent. But, I mean, all of us are sitting at this table have seen these kind of reform waves come and go, and there's fervor, and then they do something, and, it's okay, and then all of a sudden we're back 5 years later with another outburst.
All right, we have some other big stories of the week we're going to take up. We're going to go to a break. Then I'm going to turn quickly then to Karen. There's some proposal that deals with these navigators on the federal health. There's been some controversy over them. Karen will weigh in on that, and we'll get some big stories from our other journalists in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania, and by the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, representing companies involved in America's most affordable, reliable energy source. To learn more, visit pacoalalliance.com.
We continue with Journalists Roundtable with Angela Couloumbis, John Micek, and Karen Langley. Karen, let's start with you for sort of the big stories here. You know, there's been this concern about navigators. You know, these are the folks who are assisting people to sign up for the Affordable Care Act. Republicans in particular have been concerned about their qualifications. So what's going on in the Pennsylvania legislature with a proposal to regulate navigators of the federal health care law?
So the navigators, like you said, is a kind of worker that's called for under the Affordable Care Act, who's supposed to help educate consumers about the plans that are available on the exchanges. They're not insurance agents. They're not supposed to sell insurance plans, but they're supposed to inform people about how to do the process. And so there has been criticism that these folks are not well regulated enough under the federal law or existing state laws. And we've seen about half the states since the Affordable Care Act became law pass additional restrictions and regulations on them. And now there's some effort among a number of the Republican senators here in Pennsylvania to enact some state regulations on those navigators. Among those would be requiring the navigators to register with the state insurance department and also pass a criminal background check.
Why would I suspect that no Democrat is supporting this at the moment? Is that a safe assumption?
There are no Democrats among the numerous sponsors of the bill, and certainly the ranking Democrat in the Senate committee that held a hearing this week said that he respects wanting to protect consumers, but that he thinks there are sufficient protections already in state and federal law.
So it's typically, I mean, this whole law has been hugely controversial, and it's been certainly, the responses have been partisan. Just as any prospects that this will move, or it's just been introduced?
It has been introduced, and there's been a hearing at the committee level. The committee chairman, who's one of the sponsors, is certainly supportive of it, and says he hopes to get action on it before the June 30th state budget deadline. The Republican caucus, as far as the floor goes, isn't saying yet, or says that they have not yet discussed it and don't officially know. So we'll have to say.
John Micek, big story of the week you're working on?
As we sit here today, we're about, 7 or 8 weeks out from the May 20th primary. Was traveling with the gubernatorial candidate Tom Wolf in the Lehigh Valley earlier this week. Ubiquitous with his campaign commercials, did probably a half dozen interviews. Every single last voter had seen them, was able to quote them chapter and verse. It was pretty extraordinary, but that's what, $5 or $7 million in ad buys will get you, that kind of deep penetration. We see that in the numbers in your poll that came out just this last week. About a third of voters supporting Mr. Wolf, with not quite half who are either undecided or just plain going to stay home come primary day. So, the biggest question now is who among the remaining three, Allison Schwartz, Rob McCord, or Katie McGinty, can catch this guy between now and May 20th?
All right, we're going to run to a break before we have our final segment. I'll come back with Angela. We'll talk a little bit more, conclude where we started with this, the fallout from the Attorney General's sting operation. We'll do that when we have our final segment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Business Council and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation.
All right, the final segment. Here we go. Karen, before we move to Angela and our final comments on the Attorney General's sting, Karen, you have a quick follow-up on the story about the healthcare navigators.
Right. So on the proposal in the state Senate to enact some regulations on the navigators who work under the federal health care law, it's probably worth noting that the insurance department here at the state level doesn't sound particularly eager for this legislation. They say that they have the authority under existing law to go after people who are going beyond what they're allowed to do in terms of selling insurance, and so they're not asking for this.
Okay, I get it. John, before we go to Angela, we're still this roiling debate over Medicaid in this state, and the governor this week expressed some frustration without getting approval from HHS. Any sense about where that goes? I mean, it doesn't look like Health and Human Services. I mean, they've had, well over a year to respond. He removed the employment, the job search requirement.
Yeah, and I mean, this is now bubbled up to the electoral level. Obviously, the longer this goes on, the longer these 500 or 700,000 people in the state go without coverage. The governor's plan wasn't to have started until January 1st of next year. Anyway, he dropped the job search requirement, which is one of the major impediments to getting processed. But Washington still has a lot of questions about the way this plan is going to be implemented. And
he was frustrated apparently this week in a statement.
I think he said he'd reached his breaking point with the feds.
Then the only other option might be to accept the what I'll call traditional Medicaid expansion, and we don't have any sense yet about whether he would go to that as an alternative.
There are 4 people who would very much like to do that. None of them are named Corbett, though.
Yeah, and they're all the Democratic components of his. I got it. Well, we'll deal with that another time. All right, Angela, back into the legislature. If the Attorney General doesn't move forward, if there's no prosecution, and that's what it looks like,
correct.
What's going on with the legislature in regard to this very sting that you've been reporting about?
Well, the leaders in the House have both Democrats and Republicans have said, we will give you House Committee on Ethics, a rarely used committee, the ability to do your jobs, which is to convene and look into whether the conduct of these 4 legislators broke any ethics laws. What we've seen so far, and there has been a formal complaint filed both with the House Committee on Ethics and with the State Ethics Commission. So what we've seen is, well, I should say that because both operate in secret, we don't really know exactly what's happening. But we reported earlier this week that the House Committee on Ethics did convene, albeit just the Republicans. At least I didn't see any Democrats on that committee walk out of the meeting. And the first person they brought in to speak to them was Frank Fina, who was the lead prosecutor in the Sting investigation. And he spent about 2 hours in there telling them about the investigation.
Right. Yeah. So the Ethics Committee, John, you've covered this for a long time. We have about 50 seconds left. The House Ethics Committee could reprimand, censure, could they, right? Are these boot them out?
Reprimand, censure. I don't think that they can. I don't know. Maybe they might. I think they can expel.
The chamber could expel. I think
after a conviction, I think, or something like that. Yeah. I think the last time this was used was Frank Serafini back in the late 1990s, early aughts. I mean,
another House member.
Another House member. I mean, this is a very rarely used mechanism, and it meets in secret.
But everybody's going to be watching this, I think, very careful. Well, thanks for coming on, providing your insights. We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.